My name is Sophia. I'm 36 years old. I'm a licensed architect running my own firm in Austin, and last spring, my late husband's former in-laws spent 4 months trying to convince a probate judge that I was unfit to manage my own stepdaughter's trust fund, using screenshots they doctored themselves. I want to show you the exact moment I found the metadata that proved it. But first you need to understand how a woman who never once raised her voice at that family ended up sitting in a courtroom being described as financially predatory by people who had known her for 9 years. Picture this: a probate courtroom in Travis County, April 14th, 2026, 10:20 in the morning. My late husband's former mother-in-law, Patricia Renfrew, testifying under oath that I had systematically isolated my stepdaughter from her biological grandparents. That's where this ends. Let me walk you through how we got there. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. These stories land differently depending on what you've been through, and I read every single one. I married David Renfrew in 2018. He was a widower, his first wife, Claire, having died of ovarian cancer in 2015, leaving behind a 9-year-old daughter named Lily. I met David through mutual friends in 2017, and I fell in love with him slowly, carefully, aware from the very beginning that marrying a widower with a young daughter meant inheriting a complicated set of relationships I hadn't built and couldn't fully control. Claire's parents, Patricia and Harold Renfrew. David had kept his late wife's surname for Lily's sake, a detail that would matter enormously later, had been deeply involved in Lily's life since Claire's death, and I understood, from our very first dinner together in 2017, that earning their trust would take time. For the first 4 years, it did seem to work. I never asked Lily to call me Mom. I made a point every year on Claire's birthday and the anniversary of her death of taking Lily to visit Claire's grave myself if David was traveling for work, a gesture Patricia herself once told me in 2019 meant more to her than she could say. I built a real relationship with Lily on her own terms, slowly, without ever trying to replace a mother she'd lost too young to properly remember. I learned to braid her hair the way Claire apparently used to, from an old video Patricia sent me unprompted one Christmas. I kept a framed photo of Claire on Lily's dresser without ever being asked to, because it felt, to me, like the obvious thing a decent person would do, not a sacrifice worth mentioning. David used to tell me, in the quieter moments of our marriage, that he'd never expected Patricia to warm to me as quickly as she did, that Claire's death had left her guarded in ways that took most people years to get past. I took real pride in that early trust, the kind of pride you feel when you've earned something the hard way rather than been handed it. I think that's part of why what came later cut as deep as it did. I hadn't just lost a friendly relationship with my in-laws. I'd lost the specific belief that 9 years of careful, deliberate effort could ever be enough to make someone see you as permanent rather than provisional. David died in March 2023 of a sudden cardiac event at 44, leaving Lily, then 14, in my sole legal custody as her stepmother, per will he'd updated in 2021 specifically naming me as guardian and trustee of the modest trust fund, roughly $340,000 he'd built for her college education and future needs. That decision, I would learn over the following 3 years, was the single sentence in an 11-page will that Patricia and Harold Renfrew never fully forgave. The shift began slowly, the way these things always seem to. A comment at David's memorial from Patricia about how blood matters more than paperwork when it comes to raising a child. A pointed remark 8 months later about how the trust really should have named actual family as trustee, not someone who married in. I let those comments slide for almost 2 years, the way you let things slide when you're grieving your husband and trying to hold a 14-year-old's entire world together at the same time. The binary choice moment came in the fall of 2024. Patricia and Harold requested that Lily spend an entire summer with them the following year, unsupervised, at their lake house in Michigan, a request I declined, not out of spite, but because Lily herself, then 16, told me privately she didn't want to go. That her grandparents' constant remarks about her real mother made her feel disloyal to me in ways she found exhausting to manage. I honored her wishes and told Patricia, gently, that Lily preferred a shorter, 2-week visit instead. Patricia's response, delivered over the phone in a voice I hadn't heard her use before, was, "You have no right to keep her from her own grandparents, Sophia. You're not her mother. You're a placeholder her father happened to marry." I didn't argue. I simply repeated that the decision was Lily's, and hung up the phone shaking in a way I hadn't since David's funeral. If you've ever been told by in-laws that your role in a child's life was somehow conditional, temporary, a placeholder for someone realer than you already know exactly the particular kind of grief that sentence carries. Tell me in the comments if you've lived some version of that. For the following year, contact with Patricia and Harold grew sparse and strained, though never fully severed. Lily, now 17, maintained her own relationship with them independently, texting them directly, visiting occasionally on her own terms, a boundary I fully supported because I never wanted my own hurt feelings to cost her a relationship with people who, whatever their flaws, were still her only living connection to her mother. What I didn't know until February 2026 was that Patricia and Harold had spent much of that year building a case, quietly consulting an attorney, gathering what they described as evidence of financial mismanagement regarding Lily's trust, and preparing a petition to have me removed as trustee on grounds of self-dealing, a petition that would eventually be filed with the probate court that same month, timed. I'd later realize exactly 6 months before Lily's 18th birthday, when the trust terms allowed a portion of the funds to be distributed at the beneficiary's discretion for the first time. The petition itself, when my attorney, a probate specialist named Renata Alcaraz, obtained a copy, alleged that I had used trust funds for personal expenses, citing 3 specific transactions: a $4,200 payment described as unauthorized personal travel, a $1,800 charge labeled personal shopping, and an $11,000 withdrawal characterized as undisclosed cash transferred to the trustee's personal account. Attached as exhibits were screenshots of what appeared to be the trust's online banking portal, showing those exact transactions under my name. I stared at those screenshots for a long time in Renata's office because I recognized every single one of those transactions, and none of them matched what the petition claimed. The $4,200 personal travel charge was Lily's own college visit trip to 3 universities the previous fall, a trip I'd taken her on personally, fully documented with hotel and flight receipts in her name, as well as mine, precisely the kind of trust expense the document explicitly authorized. The $1,800 personal shopping charge was Lily's own back-to-school wardrobe and supplies, purchased with her present at the register, also an authorized expense. The $11,000 withdrawal was a scholarship supplement payment made directly to Lily's university for a study abroad program, wired through the trust's own account exactly as the trust document specified. These transactions are real, I told Renata, but the labels on them are completely wrong. Someone changed what these say. Renata's eyes narrowed slightly, in the specific way I'd come to recognize meant she'd caught the same scent I had. "Sophia," she said, "banking portals don't let account holders edit historical transaction descriptions after the fact. If these screenshots show different labels than what actually processed, someone altered the image itself, not the transaction." Renata retained a digital forensics examiner named Colin Marsh, no relation to anyone in my own family, a coincidence I noted and moved past, who analyzed the metadata embedded in the screenshot image files Patricia had submitted to the court. Colin's report, delivered 3 weeks later, confirmed what we'd already suspected. The images had been edited using a photo manipulation application, with the editing history still embedded in the file's metadata, dated February 9th, 2026, for days before the petition was filed, and crucially, from a device registered to an email address belonging to Harold Renfrew. Colin walked Renata and me through it in plain language during a call that I remember taking standing at my kitchen counter, unable to sit still. The original bank screenshots, he explained, still existed in a cached format on the trust portal's own servers, and when he laid them side by side with what Patricia had submitted to the court, the difference was unmistakable even to my untrained eye. The transaction dates matched exactly, the dollar amounts matched exactly, but the description fields had been digitally replaced. The font kerning subtly inconsistent with the bank's actual formatting, in a way that only careful forensic comparison would ever catch. Whoever did this had been careful, but not careful enough to account for the fact that editing software leaves a fingerprint behind, whether or not you remember to think about it. I remember reading that report at my kitchen table and feeling more than anything an exhausted kind of clarity, the sense of finally understanding completely exactly what these two people, whom I had spent 9 years trying to keep close to my stepdaughter out of respect for a mother she'd lost, were actually capable of when they believed something belonged to them by blood rather than by law. If you've ever discovered that people you trusted had fabricated evidence against you rather than simply asking you a hard question directly, you understand exactly the specific kind of betrayal I mean. Drop a comment if you felt that. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters. I didn't go public with any of this immediately, and I didn't confront Patricia and Harold in anger, even though every instinct told me to. Renata advised, and I agreed, that the strongest possible move was to let the doctored evidence be entered formally into the court record first, giving them enough rope to fully commit to their claim under oath, before Collins' forensic analysis ever surfaced to contradict it. The hearing took place on April 14th, 2026. Patricia testified first, describing, under oath, a pattern of what she called systematic isolation and financial self-dealing, referencing the 3 doctor transactions directly and describing them from the witness stand in specific dollar amounts that matched the fabricated labels exactly, not the real ones. I sat beside Renata, calm, silent, watching a woman I had once genuinely respected describe a version of events she had personally constructed out of edited images. She spoke with real conviction, and that, more than anything else that morning, told me she had spent months talking herself into believing her own fabrication was simply a slightly exaggerated version of a truth she already felt certain of. When Renata's turn came to cross-examine, she asked Patricia to confirm, specifically, the source of the screenshots submitted as exhibits. Patricia said Harold had obtained them through the Trust online portal. Renata then introduced Colin Marsh's forensic report, walking the court through the embedded metadata, the editing software signature, the timestamp, and the device registration tracing back to Harold's own email account. The courtroom went very quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone present understands, simultaneously, that something has just fundamentally shifted. Patricia's attorney asked for a brief recess before continuing, and when the hearing resumed 20 minutes later, his questioning had grown noticeably more careful, more hedged. The posture of a man who had just realized his client's version of events was no longer the only version the judge would be weighing. Harold, called to testify immediately after, admitted, haltingly, that he had altered the images. "I didn't think anyone would actually check the files themselves," he said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I just wanted a judge to understand what we were afraid of before it was too late to do anything about it." Patricia, for her part, said very little after that, sitting rigid at the plaintiff's table, and when the judge dismissed the petition with prejudice and referred the fabricated exhibits to the district attorney's office for potential perjury and evidence tampering review, she did not react at all, as though some part of her had already known, the moment Collins' report was introduced, exactly how this was going to end. Lily was not in the courtroom that day. We'd agreed, together, that she shouldn't have to watch her only living grandparents be exposed this way, whatever they'd done. I told her that evening, gently, exactly what had happened, without editorializing, letting her draw her own conclusions about people she'd known her entire life. She cried for a long time, not for me, I think, but for the version of her grandparents she'd been holding onto, the one who used to take her fishing at the lake house and tell her stories about her mother as a little girl, a version that had, apparently, always coexisted with the one capable of forging evidence in a courtroom. In the 2 months since, Lily has spoken to Patricia exactly once, a short, careful phone call neither of them has mentioned much detail about. Harold has not contacted either of us. The trust remains intact, fully accounted for, with an independent co-trustee, a corporate trust officer Renata recommended, now added alongside me. Not because a court found any wrongdoing on my part, but because I asked for it myself, wanting complete transparency going forward for Lily's sake more than my own. Lily turns 18 next month, and we've already started, together, planning what her first discretionary trust distribution will go toward, a portion set aside for her university tuition, a smaller portion she wants to use to visit the town in Ireland where Claire's own family originally came from, a trip I've offered to take with her, and one she's asked me to actually plan alongside her rather than simply fund from a distance. I think that request, more than the courtroom victory itself, is the thing I'll carry longest from all of this. A 17-year-old girl, having just watched her only living grandparents exposed for fabricating evidence against the woman who raised her, choosing on her own, to still want that woman standing beside her for what comes next. I think if you've made it this far with me, the thing worth remembering tonight is this. Love that has to defend itself with fabricated evidence was never really about protecting the child at all. And you are allowed, even when the people accusing you share blood with someone you loved and lost, to let the truth, examined carefully enough, speak louder than whatever story they've constructed about you. Real love doesn't need to edit the record. It just needs the record checked. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Share this with someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next one.